And I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar on the first deliverable from Idera. And for those of you who are not familiar with Idera and its vision and actual work, you will get a short introduction to Idera in just a few minutes. But before we get to that, I would like to just take you through a couple of housekeeping issues. As I said before, this meeting will be recorded and will be made available on the Idera website, so we can use your input for our future work. And as always, when we are participating in these kinds of meetings and webinars, please keep your microphones muted, unless of course you want to speak, which you are welcome to. And if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you can write to Rasmus in the chat. Then he will see if he can help you. Also, before we go further on in the presentation, I would like to say that we really encourage you to give us input during this webinar. You can do it either by writing in the chat or by raising your hand, and we will try and keep track on you. And you are more than welcome to both ask questions to the presentations, but also to give input to the content and the work that we present for you. Due to time restrictions on this webinar, there will not be time to go into elaborated discussions with you and on the input that you give, but you can rest assured that we will take your questions and input into consideration in our future work, and it will be really valuable for us. Okay, next slide. So just to give you an idea of who is speaking today, that's the people on the slide here. So I'm Lotte, and I will start and end this webinar today. Afterwards, Philip will give a short introduction to the Idera project as a whole, and Morten and Deepak will present the content of the deliverable which are on discussion at this webinar. And Rasmus will assist us along the way and make sure that we don't forget anything. Okay, next slide. So on this slide, you can see the funders of Idera and also the important point that the views and opinions expressed in Idera represent those of the authors in the project and not the funders. Next slide. So let's just take a quick look at today's agenda. So as I said before, we will start the webinar with a short introduction to the Idera project as a whole, so that you have some kind of context for what you will be presented with today. Then Deepak will give you an introduction to the ongoing policy and gap analysis that we are doing and the way that we are doing our work. And Morten will take over and give you a presentation of some of two topics that we have focused specifically on in the first deliverable. And then we will have time in the end to have a discussion with you and to get your input on what's important for our future work. Yes, next slide, please. So at this point, if there aren't any questions, I will hand over to Philip.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lotte, and welcome everybody. My name is Philip Grubben from the Fraunhofer Institute of Translational Medicine and Pharmacology, and I'm based here in Hamburg, and I've got the sort of extreme privilege to be able to coordinate the Idera consortium and so help support my sort of fellow team members. Like every project, every organization, there needs to be a vision that's set out at the beginning. So this is what we're aiming for, what we're about, and I think the main thing, maybe the take-home message, is we want to create an open platform for connecting, accessing, and sharing, using and reusing digital health data. So we want to create those roads, those bridges that connect different data resources to connect healthcare providers, connect industrial organizations, connect patients, connect potential users and researchers. And we're building the highways on which they can work. And that involves creating infrastructure. It involves establishing governance and ethical systems. It involves establishing analysis and other tools that you can actually apply to the data sets. But it's it's a great enterprise. But yeah, we're busy building the roads. But what's going to come from that? And I think this is an extremely important point, is there has to be some way when it comes to the policy space as well. This is not just a technical set of problems that we're looking to solve, but we're also going to come up with consensus policy recommendations, particularly around how heterogeneous health data, so we're talking about data which is coming from a variety of different sources, so different clinical data, different data from wearable technologies, data from liquid biopsies, data from imaging systems, how we can integrate those and use those using machine-based methods, and how we can use the results of that, and how regulatory authorities can use that in their decision-making around the introduction of new medicines and new treatment regimes. So we're about creating a platform, and we're about developing consensus policies as well. So next slide, please. And we've got a set of goals, and maybe I could point you, if you want to see more details about really what IDEA is about, if you look at our website, you'll see we have a corporate slide deck, and you can sort of quite easily find these slides. But essentially, we're creating an infrastructure that will be federated in order to help preserve the privacy of the patients whose data that we're going to be working with. We're going to use the latest technology to do that. That's going to be established based upon infrastructure provided by public partners, ourselves at the Fraunhofer, but also the University of Luxembourg, who are part of the well-known Elixir network. We're going to run algorithms on that allow us to analyze data and come up with better insights on how to improve that process of prediction and diagnosis and prognosis. And the test case we've chosen is lung cancer, for many reasons, and we'll go into those in a little bit later on. And we're creating digital applications so that individual patients could be able to monitor their health status after discharge and after treatment from hospital. We're interested in data standards and extending upon those data standards and extending upon those data models. So especially in the terms of clinical data, we're looking to extend that to include the needs of different data types, including those coming from wearable technologies. We want to enable personal health, and we're very much interested in the fairness of the data, so the findability, accessibility, interoperability, reusability, and we're applying a fair framework and also a quality framework to understand what the fair level of the data is and what the competence of the data is. So what can we use the data for? What's the range of uses that we can, and reuse opportunities? We're also developing solutions around dynamic consent for secondary use and for individual patients. And finally, on the policy recommendations on secondary use, especially for real world data in the regulatory and HTA decision-making space. So next slide, please. Our funding comes from the Innovative Health Initiative, and we find ourselves very well aligned with their strategic objectives. If we look at their objectives and our objectives, there's a one-to-one match. I won't go into all of the detail of those, but you can sort of see for yourself when, for instance, when we want to come to a better understanding of the determinants of what's going on within health and disease at a technical level, the algorithms developed by our experts, both within the Fraunhofer and also TUM and within the company sites, will allow more efficient and accurate diagnosis for a number of different use cases. And we have within those use cases, and we have a clinical advisory board, for instance, which tells us, all these new tools and algorithms that we're applying, what value do they add to patients? How useful are they? We're not just doing this on a technical level, but we're really trying to get clinical input to that. But you can see there's a good alignment between what we're seeking to do with IHI and what we're seeking to do with an IDEA. And I'd ask you to have a look at more details on the website, and you can see how that looks all together. Next slide, please. Like all projects, we've got to organize ourselves so that we can efficiently deliver on what we said we wanted to do. We have a number of technical work packages, so around establishing the infrastructure and the tools in the work package 1, really having in work package 2 a group that's working on the real technical aspects of machine learning, using these heterogeneous data sets and looking at the issues involved in there, especially in the federated setting. That makes it more difficult, but it makes it more difficult technically to set up the algorithms, but actually it brings some benefits in terms of the ability to access data more easily. Demonstrating the value is critical, and that's what we do in WP3. So all of this work we're doing, creating an infrastructure, creating tools, what does it mean for patients? And that's the question that we're asking in WP3 with expert advisors from our Clinical Advisory Board. And underpinning this is standards. We're talking about heterogeneous data. We need to be able to link those data, harmonize those data, analyze those data within a single harmonized context, and we need to apply standards. And encapsulating all of this is our ethical and legal framework. So we want to do things which in a compliant manner, and we want to make sure that in terms of long-term sustainability, we can also offer this platform again in a legally and ethically compliant manner. And behind that, we've got the policy recommendations, and we've got, which is what one of the areas we'll be talking about today, but also exploitation, dissemination, and general project management. Next slide, please. And we're very much linked into a number of other ongoing EU initiatives in Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, but also the European Health Data Space. So we're positioning ourselves as one of the providers of data space services and resources within Europe. This is a dynamic area. The EHDS legislation and the EHDS infrastructure and how it's going to be set up is changing, and it's a constant discussion. And we're just about to publish a paper on IDERA's position towards that hopefully you'll find useful and that you'll be able to read, and you'll see in the next few weeks that will be coming out as well. We're just about to submit that. Next slide, please. And we're very much aligned to data space principles in terms of the sense that we're going to build a health-specific ecosystem that looks to empower individuals and enables the reuse of the health data itself. Are the users of the platform, both in terms of applying application of algorithms, but also providing access to data, are coming from all of the different sectors. So researchers from industry and from academia, patients, policymakers, healthcare professionals, healthcare providers, as well as the regulators themselves. Next slide, please. And this is the final slide. So we are part of an ecosystem of projects that are looking to address these similar problems, and we're very fortunate in that the team that we have is deeply embedded in these other projects. So we're learning from these other projects. We're not seeking to replicate what they've done before. So that's something that means that I think we can efficiently establish this infrastructure and make it available to the community for their use. It's a lot of work to do this. There's a lot of discussions ongoing. It's a difficult job to be the coordinator, but I'm very happy to also be talking in these types of forums to the community outside our project and to the general public, and also to get your feedback on what we're doing, especially on questions of data access. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion later on today. And I'd like to hand back to Lotte and the colleagues now for the next section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Are there any quick clarifying questions for Philip before we move on? Okay, then I would like to start to say that I've forgot to say an important point at the beginning of the meeting. So here you have it. I said that we encourage you to participate actively at this webinar, but we also really encourage you to afterward to visit the IDERA website and give your input via the public consultation form, which you find on the IDERA website, so that we make sure that we capture all your inputs and valuable comments. So really, if you have time and the chance, go to the IDERA websites after this webinar and visit the public consultation form so that you can give your inputs to you. And Rasmus has already put the link in the chat, and it will also be on the slides by the end of this webinar. Okay, but then let's move on to presentations of the content which was in the first deliverable that we would like your input on. And I would like to first hand over to Deepak.
Lotte, thank you very much. Rasmus, could you shift to the next slide? Thank you. So you've understood from Phil that we are on a rather ambitious data-oriented and analytics-oriented journey to try to really make an impact on the care of patients at different stages of lung cancer, but that the overall architecture and approach is not strongly tied to lung cancer. That's our exemplar environment, our proving ground. But really, we are looking at a broader, potentially in the future, scalable, multi-condition data ecosystem, infrastructure, and so on. And that is sitting inside a complicated landscape of legislation, policy, good practices, international standards, and other initiatives that are making inroads in some overlapping areas to us. And so the task that we are co-leading is about interacting with that external landscape. And we have a particular focus on what might be the formal objects and instruments out there that IDERA need to take on board. So that means European regulations, other legislation, policies, guidelines, and also things like international standards. And we need to look at those from a number of perspectives. One is, do these specify rules and obligations to which we have to conform, such as, for example, the GDPR, the European General Data Protection Regulation? That is not a flexible instrument for us to play with. That is an object that we have to conform to. Are there things that are not as formal as a regulation, but they represent good approaches that we should adopt? One of the terms that's come up already is OMOP, the common data model that is becoming increasingly bottom-up used. Is that a model that we should be adopting, or should we reinvent our own wheel? I hope you would agree the former, not the latter, but that's an example. Are there things that appear to be unhelpful in the landscape that maybe we should be looking to try to lobby to change? Maybe the kinds of purposes that IDERA is pursuing were not in the mind of the people when they created it, and should we consider changing it? And do we do this alone, or do we first find friends? Do we find others in Europe who maybe have similar challenges, where we maybe need to work together to help to introduce change? And then maybe there are things that are good practices that we will start to create, that we will invent, that maybe we could join forces with others and contribute to them, or they could contribute to us. So that's really the kind of landscape of engagement that we are dealing with. Next slide, please. Well, actually, I think the next slide is purple. So, well, actually, very nice purple. You could go on to the next slide if you could. Thank you very much. So how have we approached this? We've been running for a number of months already. And what we've done is first said, can we create a topic map, a kind of landscape view of the possible headings under which we might look for things? If we look at IDERA and everything it's trying to do, what are the things it's trying to do, and where might we look? And then for any one of those, we've developed a template to summarize what we can learn from an external item. And we've started to pull these together. And what we've done for month 8 is an initial version of that, and that's a document that Lotte has invited you to take a look at. It's on our website and comment on, although if you don't want to read the whole document, you can comment on this webinar because we're summarizing some of the key things. And in month 20, so quite a while ahead, we'll produce a second installment of that. But we will still continue doing it because the landscape keeps evolving. So our activity, with which you're very welcome to interact more than once in the coming years, will be to continue to look at this landscape and say, how is it changing? How is it impacting on IDERA? How can IDERA impact on the landscape? Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have a template. What we decided to do is not to create something that is large, complicated, and wordy, the instruments we're summarizing are large, complicated, and wordy. And the last thing we want to do is to produce a clone of that, which is equally indigestible. So what we've done is said we're going to create a fairly simple template. I won't ask you to read all the small print, don't worry about it. What we have done in for each of the instruments we've attacked, we have quickly summarized what are the content of that instrument that apply to IDERA, as opposed to summarizing the whole instrument. What are the take-home messages from that content? Are there things that then IDERA has to take on board? So what are the impacts on us internally? And then what are the things that we might offer externally facing? Are there things we might offer back to the sources of that material, or areas we might collaborate with others on? So we've got a fairly simple template, and our deliverable is really a compilation of these templates. The next slide, please, Rasmus, is the topic map. Now, this is not a comprehensive view of the entire data and infrastructure and architecture and ICT universe. That would be huge. But I will also worry you that each of these colors is itself the root node of a tree of more detailed concepts. We have not wanted to overload you with a massive tree, and that would be inappropriate, although the trees are decomposed in the document. This is rather like our candidate environment. When we come across an instrument, we might try to group it or group a set of instruments under one of these headings so we could look at them collectively and holistically. So, for example, artificial intelligence, there are several things out there. There is, of course, the EU Act, the AI Act, but it's not the only instrument of relevance and interest to us. But if we bring them together under the AI heading, we can start to do some sense making. And that's why we've used a topic map. It also makes us a bit proactive and say, well, do we have anything on cybersecurity? We should go and look if we haven't found anything spontaneously. So we see this both as a guiding star for us, but also a way of organizing the content that we work on. Next slide, please. So far, and this is really reporting on the work in progress, we have collected some templates on these topics. There's a lot of words on this slide, and I'm not planning to talk to all of these, but what you can see is there are topics like the GDPR, AI, interoperability, and so on, and consent. And we have, so for a big instrument like the GDPR, you can't really do one template. So we've taken different features within the GDPR and made a template on it. And we've done the same with AI, and we'll continue to do that. So going through all of these would be very boring and not very helpful and a bit superficial. So what we've done is pick two topics that actually are quite chewy, where we've made a start, but actually where we want to do more in the months ahead. And so we thought these might be easier topics for you to actually intellectually engage with and actually give us some feedback on. So it's probably not useful to ask you at this minute to tell us whether sort of a massive topic map or a long list of templates is interesting. So I won't ask you to respond now. I'll instead hand over to Morten and ask him to take us through two topics one by one that I think are much more interesting to put your brain age on. So Morten, over to you to really do the interesting content.
Thank you so much, Deepak. So as Deepak said, in our initial work to elicit these policy gaps based on literature and contributions by the consortium members, we did identify two salient topics that stood out as particularly crucial. And I'm just going to very briefly, as Deepak said, this is intricate material, complex and huge topic. So I'm just going to very briefly going to run through and highlight some of the issues that we did find. And mind you, these are highlights, and that the ones I present are to be understood as examples and should not be taken as exemplifying an exhaustive list. Could I have the next? So our first topic was consent, and I think it's probably well established by now that consent ensures that data access, use, and reuse respect individuals' rights. And Here, the GDPR establishes a formal framework emphasizing legal basis, transparency, and accountability in handling personal data, safeguarding the autonomy of data subjects. In many ways, so consent ensures that decision-making is vested in the hands of the data subject, and by doing so, it ultimately helps promote a strong sense of trust between those who give their data and those who aim to use it for diverse research purposes. Consent and the GDPR framework, as we often work with, ensures that transparency because it explicates that receivers and users of data readily inform data subjects with necessary and in plain language information regarding how and for what data is going to be used. And in other words, consent, as formulated in the GDPR, fosters transparent processing of data by demanding detail and explicitness when researchers ask for consent. Now, even if IDERA doesn't necessarily collect, because that's not the whole idea behind IDERA, collect new forms of informed consent, some of its data sources may have collected data on the basis and may transfer some obligations in that regard to IDERA. And therefore, we have deemed that consent deserves special examination in the context of IDERA. Could I have the next slide, please? So when looking into this topic of consent, it became apparent, and as exemplified in the synthesis of our templates, there are several potential gaps in the current legal and regulatory landscape when issues of consent means the world of cross-country use and reuse of real-world data for health research, such as in the case of projects like IDERA. It is by now well acknowledged that the interpretation of GDPR is subject to great variation throughout the EU member states, and that in itself may hamper cross-country collaboration. Moreover, interjurisdictional research may also be hindered by the existence of additional national laws that impose additional limitations. This may be further complicated by the fact that public and private institutions in the different member states are subject to different regulations. It could also be noted that the processing of sensitive data in situations other than gaining consent is actually allowed under Article 9 of the GDPR if it serves to legitimate interest of the public, and that could be including public interest in the field of public health, availability of health or social care, handling or administration of health or social care systems, and services in accordance with union or member state law, and public interest in such issues as scientific or historical research. However, when looking to the literature and the legislation currently, there is a lack of precise definitions for these intermediary situations like public-private partnerships. And this may cast doubt on the existence of particular legal justifications, like what may actually count as being in the public interest. When we look further into material, there are also additional gaps pertaining to the very essence, the idea of consent. As we probably all know, it's crucial that consent is given voluntary and can be revoked, and this means that we are obligated to protect patients from negative consequences if choosing to revoke their consent. However, from looking at the material currently, our initial analysis revealed that there is sort of a lack of research focused on the actual voluntariness in patient-caregiver relationship and whether consent given under such circumstances may be considered truly voluntary. Additionally, explicit reason terms for consent is crucial according to the GDPR, and this includes explicating processing purposes. However, in such research as we're dealing with in terms of IDERA concerning reuse of data, such processing purposes may be hard to explicate to the level of detail needed and further complicated when context shifts, such as would be the case in a project like IDERA. In terms of what I just mentioned, different interpretations among member states further complicates this form of interjurisdictional research. Now, we're looking to the GDPR. Recital 33 allows for broad consent, as Deepak was also mentioning, and this implies a lesser degree of specificity and transparency. Broad consent can be seen as an instrument that to encourage data altruism in the context of the Data Governance Act. However, even though there may be a lessened demand for clarity and openness when working under Recital 33, finding out what level of consent is required is still crucial, so that in the event that additional requirements are not met, individuals still have sufficient control over the data. So concluding, these gaps point to a landscape that we sort of deem we need a further exploration to inform and guide project like Idera, utilizing reuse of data. And I think that was just my short run through. And I'm just going to make a small pause and then ask if you have comments for each of these topics. And if you don't have any comments right now, but but if these are stimulated underway, do put them in the comment section or write us afterwards. But I'm just going to have a small pause for a couple of minutes to see if people have questions to comment before proceeding to the next topic. I'm counting on you, Rasmus, to see the raised hands if there are any. Okay, then maybe I should, Lotte, if you would change for the next slide. So the next topic that we identified in the initial sort of preliminary gap analysis phase was the topic of incentives. And I think it should probably come as less of a surprise that meaningful incentives are crucial to stakeholders in order for them to engage actively in an entire data life cycle. Got the next slide, please, Lotte. In many ways, one could say that good incentives exactly act as driving engines that foster collaboration and enthusiasm, creating an environment where stakeholders contribute and leverage the data ecosystem. And conversely, as we've underlined, absence or uncertainty of incentives, disincentives may act as critical barriers to establishing a productive and sustainable data infrastructure. Could I have the next slide, please, Lotte? Building on numerous studies, when we looked at the literature and with the help of members from the consortium, several studies have pointed out that there are examples of incentive gaps or disincentives for stakeholders that could potentially hinder collaboration in data sharing in projects like Idera. If we take the disincentives among health researchers, this reluctance to share data aligned with FAIR principles is often compounded by concerns about intellectual property protection. And when looking to the incentive systems of the research world, there is currently sort of a bit of a scarcity of frameworks ensuring that researchers are properly credited for data sharing. Currently, as it stands, fear of losing ownership and academic competitiveness and the impact of promotion based on authorship sort of further contributes to a hesitancy to engage in transparent data sharing practices. Privacy concerns add another layer of complexity, especially when dealing with data involving critical participants, those working in the field, because researchers may hesitate to share information that could influence the success of ongoing research, but particularly in the realm of health data, where robust anonymization is sort of a challenging affair. Furthermore, there is the prospect of increased workload without adequate funding that serves as disincentive for many researchers already immersed in strenuous demanding workloads. So this possesses a potential hindrance to the exchange of data within the scientific community. If we look on the patient side, a substantial corpus of, if we look at the patient side, a substantial corpus of literature has pointed out that the active sharing of the data among patients becomes crucial for advancing collective understanding in various health-related domains. And in reality, research actually demonstrates that subjects are often willing to share data. Their motivation to participate stems from a whole array of different desires to contribute to the common good, to anticipate personal benefits, or advance healthcare. Yet what we also see is that a lack of transparency, controllability, and awareness of data use can breed distrust, and this ultimately may hinder the willingness to share data. There was a recent report from the TATUS project suggesting recommendations to incentivize data sharing, emphasizing policy-level initiatives, data literacy, public awareness, and feedback mechanisms. And it underlines that it's essential to address conflicting values and concerns, especially when involving for-profit companies in collaborative efforts, because as several studies have emphasized and highlighted, it is exactly this involvement of for-profit companies that may raise skepticism among some data sharers. And when looking to the for-profit company side, these additional aims of generating profit may challenge public-private collaborations regarding how research is accessed and used. As literature underlines, this acquiring and analyzing data commands significant financial investments. I think that is, and one could say that these financial commitments are shared among public health organizations as well, regardless of the profit orientation. However, the landscape becomes more complex when examining the context of for-profit companies, because much like researchers mentioned earlier, for-profit companies face additional complexity in the form of uncertainty surrounding intellectual property protection, and this uncertainty may pose a critical disincentive for for-profit companies, because it clouds the pathway towards profit realization that is commensurate with the substantial investments made. For for-profit companies, this interplay between the need for robust intellectual property protection and the imperative to share and collaborate in data-driven initiatives may result in collaborations that inherently sort of carry a risky profile and may act as a disincentive to further collaboration. Moreover, such challenges that I've mentioned to public for-profit collaboration may be further exacerbated by patient views over for-profit incentives, as we've seen, as I just mentioned, that these are actually some of the issues that may raise skepticism among patients. Overall, okay, I think my camera froze. 2 seconds. Let me just Sorry, I think my camera froze. So, in conclusion, understanding and accommodating and aligning incentive and structures throughout the data lifecycle are pretty much, we agree on, are imperative. However, cultivating data-centric culture where stakeholders are not just willing but eager to participate will contribute to the success and effectiveness of our evolving data ecosystem. But looking to incentives we deem as a valuable and needed place for further exploration. And I'm just going to again make a brief pause to see if there are any questions or any remarks. And if I'm speaking fast or otherwise, do let me know. I'm not a native speaker. No comments. Well, I think then I will hand over the microphone to Lotte again.
Yeah, thank you, Morten. So for the last 20 minutes of this webinar, we would like to engage with you and perhaps hear your comments, inputs, questions on the presentation so far, but also on proposed future topics for our work. Yes, next slide, please. So I would just like to show you this slide, which is with the questions that you are asked if you are going to the website and visit the public consultation for the deliverable and the content that we have shown you today. So these are, of course, also questions that we would like to have input here on today, but also if you have other input besides these questions. But if you're going to the website and entering the public consultation form, there will be these 4 questions. So are there other dimensions of our current analysis than the 2 topics that Morten have presented that we should, in the 2 topics that Morten have presented, that we should identify and explore further? Are there other topics than the ones mentioned in the deliverable impacting the use of health data that we should explore further in our work? Are there any areas of legislation, standards, or good practices other than the ones mentioned in the deliverable that we should investigate? And last, are there any initiatives or settings of large-scale use of health data to accelerate research and improve the quality of care that we should be aware of and examining? So these are the questions that you are asked in the public consultation on the website. You can consider them also for the discussion of the remaining time of this webinar. Next slide, please. So we are just putting on the topic map once again in order for you to be inspired or to have in mind what have been on our radar for the work so far. And then I would like to open the floor and the mics to see if any of you have questions, comments, input for the work that we have already done or the work that we are going to focus on in the future in this gap analysis and policies on data access. So please raise your hands or just grab the mic and speak up. You can also write comments in the chat if. Yes, please, Raina.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. I haven't seen, I'm not sure if the topic considers only pharmaceuticals or are you including medical technology, diagnostics as well?
Yeah, so all of the IDERA work is both including pharmaceuticals and medical technologies as well.
Okay, for HTA, you are aware that there's a European regulation coming into force in January 2025 for medical devices, and there will
Yes.
be public clinical data mandatorily available for medical technology, IVDs, and devices once EUDAMED, the European database, will be fully running. Then, like for pharma, the manufacturers are obliged to put a resume, an overview of clinical data on the publicly accessible web page of EUDAMED on each and every of their products.
Yeah.
So that's just
Yes,
some
we
input.
are tracking. No, it's nice of you to raise this, Rainer. We are lucky that in our consortium we have a few HTA bodies that are helping us to keep an eye on this topic, and we're also involved in some other recently funded European projects that are working with HTA on, if you like, the next generation of assessment methodologies. So we will have to. We haven't focused on that in this task because there is another group of HTA people looking at that issue, but we will be working closely with them. And so I think it's very nice to know that you have raised it for us. It is absolutely important, and we will have to look at the quality processes of development, because the implications for IDERA are not on the HTA receiving side, but on the developing side, that we need to make sure that our technical teams and data teams build up the evidence portfolio correctly. So thank you for highlighting that.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
So you've gathered, everyone, that the, if you like, the headings under which we've tried to focus attention at the moment are to do with data access into the IDERA or any other innovation ecosystem. Morten's two topics are really about the willingness for data to be made available for other purposes like ours from others. So are they willing, which is the incentives topic, and then the permissions. So are they willing and are we able to? And consent is clearly one of the legal bases for giving us permission. So I wonder if in our audience of participants today, there are other people in the group who have had experience of challenges with the willingness to get hold of data. So have you yourself been unwilling to make data available, or have you found data you'd really like to have isn't available to you, or are there permissions barriers that you've found? Does anybody have any experience of either? We're a small group. Just if you don't want to raise your hand, just go off mute and start speaking.
Okay.
We've identified these as pretty important topics, and we've certainly had other external stakeholders reinforce to us that these are important. Another one that we will be taking forward in the coming months is public trust. What does an initiative like ADARA need to do publicly? What should be its public-facing behaviors and promises and assurances in order for public who learn about our initiative and maybe even think their data might be somewhere inside our environment, what would make them feel reassured and comfortable that it's taking place, or what would obviously conversely make them feel panicky and nervous and want to complain or opt out of their data being used if they had that choice. So we're going to be chewing that over. If you want to come in with a quick remark on public trust, please do. Otherwise, if you don't want to say anything right now, given the three topics, willingness to share, permissions to share, and public trust in the use of data, it would be impossible for you to have no opinion on any of those three. It's not humanly possible. So we absolutely want to hear what your opinions are on the website if you don't want to do it now. But here's a couple of minutes to jump in now if you'd like to.
Yeah, so this is Nairi from Johnson & Johnson. So I actually
Hi.
I have had a recent experience where I was
Yes.
asked for data. My daughter was in hospital, in and out of hospital a lot of last year. And there was, they asked, could we use the data? And this was before, obviously, I joined this initiative, right? So it's interesting to see how the brain works now.
They caught you as a member of the public.
But at the time, I mean, if you think about barriers and trust, it's how is that how and where is that consent being asked for? So, for example, if you are in, I don't know if it would happen, but if you were in an A&E, or if you're in a situation where you're already maybe worried and stressed, maybe not thinking clearly, and you're presented with a number of forms in order to understand where that data is going, I feel like that's a big barrier. That was a barrier for me, for sure.
Yeah.
There was also, so I'm based in Switzerland, like I do have a good, decent grasp of German, but not necessarily that level of German to read a healthcare form of that complexity. And so now that I'm in this initiative, it's interesting to think, I wish I had given consent, but also it's just the barriers just to a layman. How are we asking for this trust? In what format are we asking for it? What are we, what level are we expecting people to already be at in terms of their understanding of data usage before we ask, can we use their data? Because not everybody's obviously at the same level, right? So just some comments there.
No, these are really important points, and actually, interestingly, these are embedded within the GDPR already, in the sense that when consent relating to data is to be collected from an individual, it's important that there is no power imbalance. Power imbalance is specifically emphasized in the GDPR. That means that if the person who is asking you carries some authority that matters to you, then actually that they shouldn't be the one collecting it. And an example would be a surgeon who's about to operate, says, oh, by the way, can I use your records for research? You know, they're not actually holding the knife in their hand, but you feel like metaphorically they are. That's not an imbalance. That's an imbalance, because actually you know that if you don't please your surgeon and your surgeon is not pleased with me, you might not have the best outcome. I know I'm being a bit exaggerating, but that's the spirit of the GDPR and the spirit that you are expressing. I'm in the emergency department. I'm desperate to have my daughter cared for well. If I thought anything would tip the balance to get me the best possible care, I'll agree. So if I think somebody will be nicer to me if I say yes to allowing the data to be used and my daughter will get better care, you'll say yes. And that is totally inappropriate. You were put in that position, and actually that's not ethical. So I'm glad you've raised it. It's something that maybe we need to think a little bit more about. We're not expecting in Idera to be catching people in an emergency context, but if we're dealing with people with lung cancer who may be either at an uncertain stage of diagnosis and are terrified of the options that might exist for them, or they're at an advanced stage of disease and are feeling, again, terrified of the future, then we need to be quite careful about how we handle consent. That's not addressing your language issue. Of course, that's another matter, that it has to be clear and in an approachable form. You've referred to language translation, but one has to also consider health literacy and data literacy issues as well in how you frame the questions. A long and complicated form, even in your natural language, isn't always suitable for people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Any
Does
other?
anybody else feel motivated? Come on. Let's have one more juicy, interesting thought before Lotta is allowed to close the meeting.
Agree. Okay, if that's not the
Okay, Lotta, then I'll hand back
case,
to you.
can we have the next slide, please? So once again, on behalf of Idera and the team working on this gap analysis, I would like to thank everyone for joining this webinar today. And just as the last remark, I would like to once again encourage you to visit the Idera website and give input via the public consultation form in order to make sure that your inputs and comments are heard and that we are able to use them in our upcoming work. I would say it's also stated on the website that we will not give individual answers to the comments that are made via the public consultation form, but you can rest assured that we will take them into account and we will make them guide our upcoming work. So it's not that we are not looking at the comments and working with them, it's just that we are not able to give individual feedback or comments to everyone. But once again, thank you very much for joining, and we hope that you are now full of knowledge and energy to visit the Idera website and contribute to the public consultation. We would really appreciate it. It's important for us to get input which comes from outside the Idera consortium. So thank you very much for joining.